Okay, let's talk about pharma. Where's my clicker? So, FHIR for pharma. We're going to talk about a little bit about some specific parts of pharma to do with medicinal products and IDMP, but I'll come to that. So this is me, British guy, consultant, self-employed, been around in health for a few years, email address on there should you want to find me. So this is entitled Pharma, so I don't know how many of you are kind of involved in pharma deeply or whether you're just curious to know what it is. Pharma is, big pharma, the industry that makes drugs. It's kind of a different world to the healthcare industry and the, I don't know if it's an industry, but the people who prescribe drugs and treat us and the clinical world. They're almost like two sort of parallel universes a little bit. So pharma are the people who invent the drugs, research the drugs, the biotechs. They run clinical trials a lot. There's an awful lot of effort and difficulties involved in clinical trials. Lots of money is spent. Drugs are discovered and tried. And then there's this sort of the manufacture. So once the drug exists, you've got the manufacturing process and tracking and legislating all this. And it is a very highly regulated industry, because of the history of drugs and all the good and bad things they can do. If things go wrong, it's quite tightly legislated for and regulated. And as a result of some of those laws, the data that you're going to see today is needed. So it's all about drugs, but the pharma people tend to say products, medicinal products. So I'll keep referring to this word products, but that's generally what we mean by the drugs. Not always a drug, could be a device or some other thing, but yeah, products is what people tend to say. So what are we talking about today? So the main use case, and it's because it's the one that I mostly happen to be involved in my day-to-day job at the moment, is this submission of medicinal products. Yeah? So I'm not today talking about trial management or drug discovery, etc., but about when a drug has been created, the pharmacy company has an obligation to submit that to the national or international regulators to say, this is the drug, these are the ingredients, this is what it does for people, it works for children but not for adults, you can give it for condition X but not for condition Y, and can I have a license please? Yeah, and they will hopefully be granted a license for selling that drug in the UK, in the EU. If it was the FDA in the States, it would be, they would grant the license for the US. So you have to submit a whole package of detailed stuff about the drug, and that is a bigger set of information than you typically need when you're just prescribing the drug. Yeah, so this is a slightly extra, bigger data set. So the manufacturer submits this. Well, in fact, you've got there's various people. You've got the people who physically manufacture it are often not the people who actually kind of invent the drug, because they subcontract the physical manufacturing off to often sort of a less European or westernized country where things are a bit cheaper. And they eventually become the license holder, and they get the right to sell the thing. And occasionally licenses get transferred, people move a drug onto somebody else and so on. And yes, they will have done lots of approvals already, to try the drug out in humans. They will have had to go through a process and to do all the first level trials, second level trials and so on. So I mean, I'm not employed by and don't really speak for, but I have done some of this work on behalf of the EMA. So EMA are the European body that regulates licensing drugs across all the EU nations. And yeah, in the US, if those of you US stateside will be familiar with the FDA, perhaps who do a similar thing. Each individual European country, and I'm sure in other places, has their own national body as well. So in England we have the MHRA in the UK, and you can go to the MHRA and license your drug in the UK if you get approval. But typically, these pharma companies, they want to license it across the whole of Europe. They don't want to have to apply to Lithuania and Belgium and the whole thing. So there's a centralized process that goes through the EMA. Yeah. So there's plenty of other pharma use cases and there's FHIR support for those as well, because we're here to talk about FHIR. Clinical trials, recruiting patients, managing the trials, getting the data back from the trials. There's there's emerging FHIR resources for that, but it's still a little bit formative. I mean, FHIR is a great source of all sorts of patient data in a well-codified format. So for mining existing databases, looking for sort of observational studies, trying to find if all the people who were given this drug, got better or not. FHIR is obviously already good for that without any particular pharma industry add-ons or for anything special, because it's a good standard way of doing things. So that's kind of a given. There's also pharmacovigilance. So this is adverse event reporting. Yeah. So something goes wrong. You go to your doctor and you say, those tablets you gave me last week, I came out in a rash. Something's wrong here, and it was straight after I took the tablets. Yeah. So that's another piece of legislation. Drug companies are obliged to collect this data and reply to this data. And there's an adverse event resource in FHIR that kind of begins to cover some of this. These flows exist already in the pharma world, but we're trying to kind of like FHIRize them now. Some of them exist in earlier proprietary standards, for instance. Some other initiatives, so falsified medication. There's lots of problems with counterfeit drugs around the place. People just make stuff, and drugs are expensive, so people fake them. And there's software initiatives to try and help with that. I think really that there's no sort of specific application, but it's the idea is to just have better record keeping all round. If you can track the manufacturer, track the dates and where all the ingredients came from, if you have that information, it's easier to tell if things have been faked or adulterated, etc. Another piece of software, kind of before you get to the licensing and approval stage, you've probably already taken all your trial data. You've run a couple of trials. You've done the graphing. It seems to prove efficacy. There is a standard called ECTD, Common Technical Document, Electronic Common Technical Document, that where you submit all your trial information, all your graphs, your results, your interviews with patients in a big sort of book, and that's kind of like the first step of approval. So that gets a kind of human level approval to sort of go forward, and then the thing I'm talking about today is more the kind of machine level, data level stuff. More the details perhaps. So there are some standards for ECTD, but it's very much document based. It's kind of like a set of PDFs, and you wrap it in another package and submit it. It would be nice to bring that into FHIR as well, and there's some ideas there. FHIR does documents, and so we can perhaps codify that selection of information. But I think it's a long way before that dossier is fully structured, because I think at the minute it's very much a lot of Word documents and PDFs written by clinical research associates and so on. So the information is not that well structured. And a few of the use cases there, supply shortages. General IT helps all these use cases. But that's not what we're talking about today particularly. We're talking about submission of products. So you will send the drug details to the EMA, having done a lot of previous steps we talked about, and you ask for approval to market your drug in certain countries or the whole of Europe. And there is this existing system, so if any of you are involved in this industry, you might have heard of this, XEV PRM. So it's got a even longer, complicated name there, but we call it XEV. And it covers quite a lot of the information I'm showing you today, a subset of it at least. And it's been going for a few years. It's standard in Europe, but when I say standard, it's not anybody's standard. It's not HL7, it's not ISO, it's just something that EMA came up with, that people have implemented. But it's completely different from what they do in the States. So the FDA has a similar kind of thing, and they use HL7 version 3, a thing called SPL. So straight away the two, Europe and the US, are completely different. And as it says on there, big pharma is big. It's a big industry. It's a global industry. They don't want to be doing different formats to submit in Europe, and certainly not in every country in Europe, of course, but that would be even worse. But we want to line up with the US, Europe. The Japanese are also on board. You know, I'm sure the rest of the world, well, we hope that those guys will join in. So we need a standard way of sending data that we already are fairly familiar with, and we already have a way of doing it. So a standard way of doing it, well, of course, that suggests FHIR, doesn't it? So, well, not so fast, because before we get to FHIR, there's some other initiatives and sort of data gathering that we need to do before I jump in. There's a thing called IDMP. So IDMP, an ISO standard, so it's a standard but not in the HL7 world, identification of medicinal products. It's a kind of a logical model for defining the data without actually getting into messaging and schemas and so on. So IDMP has been the way that the industry has tried to align the FDA's requirements and the EMA's requirements and all the nations and Japan and so on, get their kind of like sketch of what all the data should be like before you get into the actual electronic side of things. So this has been in development, you know, transatlantic for quite a few years, and it was finally completed last year after a little bit of a hiatus a few years before that. And it has two main areas, and they all have these long, complicated, hard to remember names, but 615 for products and 238 for substances. So products is the main one I'm talking about, and substances is kind of the ingredients and so on that feed into products. So they kind of fit together. So it's a big model. Well, it's not a huge model, but you can see it in the top right-hand corner. There's no suggestion you should be able to read that, but you can see 30 or 40 classes, and this is what you see in the foreground is the summary diagram, and you can kind of see that the colours match. So you've got a yellow area for the core medicinal product. That's the kind of the grouper that says this is the thing we're going to license. It has naming at the top, and some other logical areas, manufacturer on the right-hand side there. And if you're looking close enough, you can see that each kind of group expands into 3 or 4, 5 or 6 classes in the full diagram. So this is products, and a product is something that you can perhaps put on a shelf. It's not just the substance, it's not just the tablet, but it's the combined the box, the tablets, the syringe that comes with it, the leaflet, the whole thing that has a batch number on it. Probably it's not just it's not just a substance, it's not just paracetamol or morphine or something. It's something that has been licensed and is can be ordered and put on a shelf. And we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail. So these products are things that are approved. That it's the unit that is kind of sold and you can actually grab hold of. But it has some sort of chemicals and pharmaceuticals in it. It may be made of a series of tablets, and you may get a tablet and or a powder and a liquid to combine. So it may be one or more pharmaceutical products. And it includes things like the packaging. So, do you have like a tablet, 5 blisters of tablet in a box with a, et cetera, et cetera. So all that level of details. And we also cover the clinical particulars. So these are your indications. So what to give it for. This drug is licensed for asthma. So a drug will typically be licensed for one condition. And if it turns out it's good for asthma, but if it also turns out it's good for something else, it turns out it happens to be good for, migraine or something, you won't automatically be allowed to prescribe that drug for that condition. You have to go back to the licensors and say, we've done some trials, it worked for asthma, but it just so happens that it turns out to be good for this, so you get extra licenses. So they have particular indications, contraindications, so don't give it for people who have whatever, interactions, so that's with other drugs, or sometimes with food. So don't give this drug for people who are already on another beta blocker or something, or don't give it to people who are, don't use it with grapefruit. Some medications are, if you eat grapefruit at the same time, it slows down the metabolism. So things like that. So this is our model again. A little bit more on this before we dive into the FHIR parts. Waiting for time. So we've got our product there, our yellow gadget, and you can see that it's that area in there, just to sort of navigate around. surrounding things. So you've got naming. The standard includes the naming in multiple countries and languages. So for EMA particularly, it's a multinational, multilingual, Europe. So the same drug might be known as different things in different territories, of course. And that includes sort of structured parts of the name. So you can say, well, this is the part of the name that is the, our name, the made-up name, wonder drug. And then we have a part that's the formulation. So it might be, 250 milligram tablets, etc. Slow release, quick release, cherry flavor. So all those name types are kind of like parsed up and separate. And we've got things like our authorization down in the bottom left. So that's the, has it been approved yet? Which countries? Is it over the counter? One that you can just buy in your supermarket or pharmacy, or does it have to be prescribed and so on? So what sort of level of authorization? And then something about the manufacturer and so on, where it's physically made and this kind of thing. Then we have our pharmaceutical product. So this is the actual, not quite the substance, but the actual the actual drug, the thing that's designed to have the clinical effects on the patient. And that is contrasted with the it has some ingredients, what it's made of, and so on, which links through to the substances. We said we've got the products specification 615 and the substance specification 238. So obviously a substance is an ingredient in a medication, so that's where that would join in. But the pharmaceutical product is sort of in contrast to the packaged product. So the packaging includes things like the paper and the plastic and all the rest of it. But also the thing that's given to the patient, ultimately, might be mixed from things that are in the package. So sometimes you get a powder and a liquid, and so the package would include two products, two things. But that isn't what you administer to the patient. You would mix it together, shake it, put it in the syringe, and obviously this is not commonly done in primary care, but in secondary care in hospitals and so on. So the resulting thing is the pharmaceutical product. So this is the thing that's sort of injected or given. It might not be quite the same as what's actually in the box, because there might be some different mixing and so on. It might be ground up or something like this. So that's why there's sort of two different views of the medication. So yeah, and there's a lot of detail. You can see the blue area on the right-hand side is quite complicated with packs within packs and devices. So if you can give the physical size of the tablet and the color and whether the syringe is metal or glass, or if it has some latex in it. So and you can say whether these are allergenic substances and so on. So lots of detail in there. And this is the kind of the thing that the regulators need. So you can see how this is a lot more information than you would typically need if you're just, prescribing some tablets to be taken, go and get them from the pharmacy and take them. So it's a slightly different level of detail. Here's our clinicals. So these are our indications, contraindications, and so on. Yeah, and that's a kind of like a tour of 11615 without showing you every little detail of that diagram. So, identification, IDMP, it's got the name identification in it. One of the rationales of IDMP is to be able to deal with prescriptions in a kind of cross-border, cross-country environment. So if you have some drugs or a prescription, and maybe you're on holiday, and you need to go to a pharmacy in a different country, and they don't necessarily have the same drugs on the market in that country, there might be different names and different licenses and so on. IDMP has this kind of like identification or numbering system, if you like, that we're trying to standardize. So if you prescribe something in one country, that drug will have a certain ID that's generated from the data elements in IDMP through a kind of algorithm. The idea is that a similar product in a different country would have a similar ID. So even if the name is completely different, the name is in Greek, and it's not called, Panadol in that country because that just doesn't work. By comparing the IDs, the ID acts as a kind of pointer to the fields of the model. Yeah. So that's the kind of you'd have to get people prescribing using these identifiers, so that's a bit of a big ask, but that's the ultimate goal. So if you prescribe the product or a pharmaceutical product, because you can just say, I want to give them some aspirin, but I don't care whether it's a tablet or a liquid. You don't get liquid aspirin, but if it was paracetamol, you could get a liquid or a tablet. So you can prescribe a tablet of paracetamol, or you can prescribe just some stuff, and I don't mind whether it's liquid or so on. And this is down at pack level, so you can say, well, I'm actually going to give them 20 tablet pack. So you can prescribe at different levels, you can specify different levels. So all these numbering systems allow you to, or the idea is to allow you to sort of map between similar prescriptions and say, oh, well, that's 20 tablets of this, doesn't exist in that form in this country, but it's similar to 20 tablets of this. That's the idea. So you need the logical model of what a drug, consists of in order to be able to have these, hash them together and join these bits together to come up with a number. So that the numbers are kind of pointers to elements of the model. So that's why the model supports the IDs and so on. So that's kind of the holy grail of cross-border prescribing at least in Europe. But we're not there yet, but that's one of the rationales of IDMP. Then 11238. So the product model has ingredients and a little bit of detail, but it really only kind of names the substance. It just kind of like has a code or something that says this aspirin consists of aspirin and sugar or something, or glucose or some sort of emulsifier or something like that. But that will really just be a code with no more information. The 11238 specification is kind of starts at that point and goes down like a sort of iceberg. It will have all the details of the molecular formula of aspirin and what it's synthesized from, and whether it comes from a plant and is distilled, or whether it's kind of like done by some molecular process. So this is even more kind of far away from day-to-day prescribing, because you don't generally need to know that detail. But there are people who want to know which substance is in these things, and if a factory in some country has a problem and starts to make an ingredient wrong, maybe the sugar coating is adulterated some way, you want to know exactly which substances that is involved in, and therefore which medication, so on, track it all the way through. So 11238, not going to talk about it really too much today, has different types of chemicals and nucleic acids, gene therapies. It covers the whole thing, and it's a really complicated academic detailed standard. We don't anticipate too many people will implement that, but the FDA wants a kind of global substance registry, and EMA wants a global substance registry as well. I don't know why we've got global. There's at least two planned, so they have slightly different requirements, but they will exchange data using this 11238 standard. So that's the world of substances. That's really a whole other thing. How are we doing for time? Okay. So IDMP. So IDMP, as you've seen, is a kind of logical model. You've seen our summary view, and you can see the big model in the background. But it's not a message. It's a kind of a UML model, and a lot of documentation and so on. But it has no, you can't send IDMP, there's nothing there. So the idea originally was to use HL7 version 3. So IDMP started probably about 10 years ago, and HL7 version 3 was the thing at the time. And the FDA have an implementation of their kind of pre-IDMP thing, and that's done in this HL7 SPL. But in fact, it wasn't very popular. You might have heard about the story of version 3, very complicated and academic and powerful, but difficult. People found it too difficult to use. So we're in the FHIR era now, of course. That's why we're here today. But the resources don't exist in FHIR to take an IDMP message and send it along, because FHIR covers things like medications, so you can prescribe things already, and it does have a substance class already, but it's really small. It doesn't give you the molecular structure and the whole stuff you need. So the medication resource is the one that is already used in day-to-day flow, and substance, again, it's already used. We need more information. So now we're getting into kind of like the FHIR specifics and the way FHIR is going to cover this, and this has been an interesting sort of technical modelling challenge. How do you get this stuff into FHIR without messing things up? So this is the sort of thing that goes on, medication administration resource, and there's also medication request and so on. Using day-to-day prescribing, you say, please give the patient, or please take, and then some medication, yeah? So this is standard stuff. And you may say, well, and inject using a device, or use a syringe pump to do the IV. And you may occasionally, but rarely, use a substance and say, well, actually give them a mixture of this, and this, So, but that's pretty rare. Generally, a prescription or a request will have one of these, occasionally a device. It will just say the name or the code for a tablet. You just say, give them, take 10 of these, and the code will be for, paracetamol. It won't. That's all you need. You'd have the RX norm code or the, British DM&D code or whatever it might be, G standard in the Netherlands, whatever. So you don't need much detail. You don't need to know much about the medication. That's all. It's just implicit in the formulary. If you want to know what's in the drug, you look it up in your formulary. So that's all you need. What we need is like clinical workflow, standard day-to-day prescribing. But what we need for IDMP and for regulation is a big new load of stuff, lots of stuff in here. And the substance class is rarely used unless you're mixing a drug in like a secondary care setting. You don't really use the substance thing in normal prescribing. But for the EMA, there's a whole wodge of substance stuff to go in there. So it starts to mess up the nice flow. You'd end up with a big resource in here, of which you only use like 5% normally, and then you'd have like thousands of extensions or thousands of extra bits of gubbins. So, and as I say, the world of prescribing and the world of pharma, they're completely different. Those guys, they never kind of meet, and the clinical people don't care about this stuff, basically, quite frankly. And the industry are a little bit divorced from day-to-day prescribing. So the clinical guys don't want all this stuff in their resources. And when you're trying to physically build this in FHIR, they say, what is all this? What is all this junk? So this is a problem in practical terms. So this is the proposed solution, the way we're working, to have a kind of parallel level. So you have a sort of super medicinal product thing here that has all the detail and has a relationship to medication, something like fully described by, or is licenses, some sort of relationship like that. So we start to build a different strata for the regulatory uses, and that keeps us kind of out of the face of the clinicians who are just trying to get on with prescribing things by code. So these are all drafted and exist. So there's a kind of device definition that's already in. This is already in. Substance specification is already in, and they all kind of like form this strata. And then once we're in there, we can there's relationships between them. So drugs include substances, and drugs come with devices, and devices are made out of metal and latex and things and glass. And even then, you might want to track where the metal for the device came from, purities and so on. And we can get big. We can put all our stuff in there, all our details, authorizations, interactions. We can sort of expand out without annoying these guys. So that's the kind of plan. So there are really actually three use cases. The one we talked about, the obvious one, day-to-day prescribing, infinitely the most common. Millions of prescriptions every day in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same everywhere. They don't care about this regulatory stuff. We know that. The regulators need a load more information, and they need all sorts of extra packaging ingredients that these guys don't really care how big the package is. These guys do. They never, they don't need to know half this stuff. But then there is a kind of crossover, because the things like the indications and the contraindications, these are useful things. Now your GP, he probably knows not to give aspirin to people who've got whatever, but there's decision support systems that do have this, and they could be FHIRized and standardized as well. So we realized when we came up with this, there is a bit of an overlap and a kind of almost like a third world of the sort of prescribing support world who could make use of some of this stuff. So it's not all completely just regulatory only. So this is the kind of third view. You can already get drug knowledge bases. People sell them, First Data Bank, and plenty of other companies sell these things, and it will tell you things like don't prescribe that if you're already giving them this, and it will even do things like swap to a cheaper drug to achieve the same thing. So these knowledge bases exist. They haven't really been FHIRized so far, but the plan is to use some of the new resources, plug them into this medication knowledge resource. So this is the kind of headline resource, and it will call some of the other ones. So some reuse here and some good stuff for the day-to-day people. Interestingly, there's also some level of detail in these guys that even the regulators don't need, or at least they're not codifying in IDMP. So that pricing is a good one. So the pricing is in the knowledge bases because you want to know what's cheap and save some money. But stuff like pharmacokinetics, so how it's absorbed in the body, that IDMP doesn't cover that. It's probably covered in the trial earlier stuff on PDFs, but that's not yet regulated or not in the submission for the regulators. But it is useful, in the theatre and so on. So there's different dimensions here, an overlap, but not all the same. So we're going through this quite technical exercise to take these logical models, split them up into usable chunks, and not fill FHIR full of junk that nobody needs, but come up with useful, reusable stuff. So finally, let's see. We've talked all about FHIR. That's what it looks like, the medicinal product resource. It's sort of very much inspired by IDMP. It's called medicinal product. I won't go through every field at all, but you can see the names and so on, names and languages. For those of you who know IDMP, manufacturing down on the right. What's known as orphan drug in IDMP has been given a sort of slightly more generic name, special designation. But most of the names, legal status of supply, have come pretty much straight out of IDMP. Yeah, so this is the kind of your core, the yellow bit of IDMP, if you like. With it going to a sort of slightly more technical modelling, slightly more concrete thing than the logical model of IDMP, we've normalised a few things. So the names are not so many permutations; they're coded now. So we've kind of made it a bit more technical rather than logical. But the scope is there in the current draft resources. All of IDMP. IDMP actually has two halves. It has authorized and investigational models, two very similar models, one for drugs that are in trial, one for drugs that are finished trial. All of that's in the FHIR. And there's also some vet stuff. So the vets didn't get their information into IDMP, but that is also regulated. And the same information is exchanged. So IDMP doesn't include that, but the FHIR stuff does, because people do exchange that information right now. And to say we've collapsed things down a bit, slightly condensed it. IDMP has organisations, it has documents, they're in IDMP, but they're already in FHIR. So FHIR, we just plug straight into the FHIR organisation resource, FHIR document reference resource. So the FHIR ends up looking a bit smaller than IDMP simply because some of those things already exist in there. That's nice reuse. This is some XML, not as fashionable as JSON, but there we go. So this is a draft resource. This is how a made-up product might look in IDMP, but in FHIR. The names are very similar to what you would see if you are familiar with IDMP. And these comments, the kind of comments in here, the green ones, will say, well, this is actually the medicinal product name, full name. Yeah, and it's got the same name as it happens. But like this guy here is called strength part in IDMP, but in FHIR we've kind of coded the strength, yeah? So simplified it a bit. But it should be familiar with people who are familiar with IDMP. And there's a few products hosted on there. You can just click through and explore them. All very draft, yeah. Then we have a quick tour through the rest of it. So authorizations are a key thing in IDMP. Which country it's from, is it authorized, when was it first authorized, and so on. And then our packages. So packages have, whether it's being marketed, what the authorization for this particular pack is, the big pack, the small pack. And then we have a kind of recursive, so the little thing on the right-hand side goes round and round. So you have packs within packs, and you can say whether, it comes in a big box and so on. And you can include the material? Is it cardboard? Is it plastic? Does it have a device in? Sizes, weights, measures, shelf life, the whole thing, and who manufactures it. So all details of IDMP. In FHIR resources, there's a lot of resources, but they're all relatively small. This is, 2 or 3 classes. Hopefully people can live with it. Here's the actual injectable or takeable tablet, the pharmaceutical. And remember, that might just be the tablet, or it might be some combination of the other bits of the packaging. It's only here where you get the route of administration, because this is the actual thing that's physically taken, you get, whether it's oral or injectable or whatever. You can't inject the whole pack, so it's only the actual pharmaceutical that has a route. Anyway, there's some detail there, I won't go into those, but there's a resource for the pharmaceutical and a resource for the ingredient, because obviously the ingredients might be shared between different pharmaceuticals, so you want those to be separately usable. Then we have what we call the clinicals, and we're hoping these will be generally useful. So these are close to the IDMP version at the moment, but we're probably, these will probably change a bit as we get more, the decision support people will perhaps hopefully get involved, and they'll say what they need in an interaction. And you'll be able to say, well, this medication is known or suspected to interact with this other medication, so be careful. And some management thing, what do you do if it does happen, and what does happen? Is it a rash? Is it common or not? And what do you do? So these are all pretty much draft. So I mean, basically, any input you can give to them would be great. Please have a look and give your opinion. As I say, some of them we're hoping to take out and use in general, the clinical ones. Hoping to get this into a ballot, an official sort of, we're ready now, please have a look and formally give your comments, maybe by May this year, next year in fact. But the EMA are planning we're drafting an interface that uses these product classes sort of now. That's going out for some sort of internal or nearly stakeholder consultation now, with a view to being implemented sometime 2019, hopefully. So we might be actually, we've drafted most of these resources for our own needs, and we're going to implement fairly soon. We realise that the resources may evolve and change a bit, because the community might take a couple of years to nail everything down, and things might get renamed or moved around. But we still feel that implementing with a kind of draft version of FHIR is better than implementing with some other proprietary stuff that's just, means nothing to anybody. So we recognise that it's a little bit ahead, but still we see the benefits. So substance. So this is the kind of the dark side of IDMP, all the details that some people get really excited by. It's really detailed and good academic stuff, all these categories of substances. And SPORE, that's the name of the EMA project, will use a very small subset of those initially. Just to give you a flavour, that's the current substance specification resource. It's a bit more big than the products, but that covers most of the things that all substances have in about like 10 or so classes, quite a bit of detail. And then it breaks out, so there's a nucleic acid link here. So if you've got a nucleic acid and you want to specify the whole, your bases and your chains, you can plug that in. Polymers and proteins similarly. So these are sort of, all chemicals have all of these things. They all have a molecular weight. They all have, various codes and names and things and links. And there's an extra level of detail again for your real scientific stuff. So that's as far as we'll go with that. So this is a bit parochial to EMA, but EMA has this project called SPORE, which is quite well known. Substances stands for substances, products, organizations, and referentials. Referentials are codes, basically, codes and value sets. So part of the reason, part of the rationale is to standardize on certain codes. So for IDMP to work, you need everybody to be using the same routes, so oral rather than by mouth, and you say tablet when you mean tablet, and so on. Get these things codified, and have a single European-wide database of products, substances, and organisations. So all the manufacturers will know those, and so So that's the vision, and supports all these EMA use cases. That's their statement. So I spent a lot of time lobbying them to try and get them to use FHIR, and it looks like they're going to. They came up with a standard in, well, what do you call that, a declaration earlier this year. I'd never heard of these guys until very recently, but they've proclaimed that the basic thing is to use FHIR. So that's been a rumour for a while and became public back in earlier this year. So FHIR and Pharma are meeting at least at EMA, and hopefully FDA will follow along. We're definitely talking to those guys pretty closely, and theories and plans happen, and announcements take a lot longer. But it seems good that FDA are going in that direction too. We hope. But as I say, I don't speak officially for EMA or any of these people, but that's a public thing, so I can put it on there. And that's my last slide. So thanks for listening. So thank you. So any questions? All straightforward? Okay, well, if there's no questions, you're welcome to come and chat or talk to me at the break or whatever you like. I'll be around today and tomorrow, so thanks for coming.